I'm Mark Silverthorn. I hope you enjoyed this video. Today we're going to talk about how does the passage of time affect my unpaid account. Most Canadians are fuzzy about this question, and there's three different issues, or there's three different questions that we're going to answer today. So number one is, under what circumstances does the passage of time allow me to avoid paying a debt? That's the first one. Now the second question is, at what point does the passage of time result in a unpaid account being removed from my credit report? And the second question that people have is, how old does the debt have to be until my creditors and their collection agents have to stop calling me? And so we're going to be dealing with answering those three questions today. And I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who actually knew the answer to those three questions. So we're gonna answer those today. Can I avoid paying a debt because of the passage of time? And of course the answer is sometimes. Now, there's only certain types of debt where a Canadian can take advantage of the passage of time to avoid paying a debt. And that debt I would refer to as unsecured consumer debt. So it's going to be things like most credit cards, things like that. And it may be some phone bills or cell phone bills, internet bills, things like that. What I'm going to do is talk about quickly, I'm going to briefly describe those debts where you cannot take advantage of the expiry of the passage of time or the expiry of a limitation period. If you owe money to the government, you're out of luck. If you owe money on child support or spousal support, you can't take advantage of the expiry of a limitation period. Or if you owe money on an unsecured debt and your creditor has sued you and got a judgment against you, then you can go to sleep on this for the rest of this part. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about limitation periods. And when I talk about limitation periods, I always use the example of a clock. So I'll be using the analogy of a clock for the next few minutes. And the way a limitation period works is that sometime after the date of your last payment on a particular account, a clock is going to start to run. And at some point, it's going to run so far that you're going to be in a position where you're going to avoid paying the debt. Now you're going to say to me, well, Mark, how do I know what clock it is? Well, it depends on the province in which you live, because each province has a different limitation period. I mean, as a general rule, in some provinces, and most Canadians live in a jurisdiction where the statute of limitations is 2 years. There's a few where it's 6 years. But most Canadians live in a jurisdiction where the limitation period is 2 years. Now, the next issue you're going to ask me is, when does this clock begin to run? Now, the rule of thumb is the clock on the limitation period will begin to run sometime in the 6-month period after the date of your last payment. Now, you may be saying, is there something that a consumer can do that's sort of going to mess themselves up and start things all over again? And yeah, there is. And there's two things that a consumer can do to restart that clock. And number one, they can make a partial payment. So if you're hoping that a limitation period is going to go by, the absolutely worst thing you can do is make a payment. It's okay to make a payment after the expiry of a limitation period, but please don't make a payment before the expiry of the limitation period. Now, the second thing that a consumer could do that is going to restart the clock on the limitation period is to make a written acknowledgement of the debt. And I want to emphasize it's a written acknowledgement. If you get a call from a collector at a collection agency and they say, why haven't you paid your phone bill? Or why haven't you made a car payment? If you say, oh gee whiz, I lost my job, I really want to pay that debt, I know I owe the debt, and I'll pay it as soon as I can, that's not a written acknowledgement of the debt because it's not in writing. So I'm asking you, do not send your creditor or their collection agent anything in writing, by letter, by email, by fax, saying that you are acknowledging that you owe the debt. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, in some provinces, they've put kind of a pause or a freeze on the running of the limitation periods. So when you're calculating whether or not a limitation period has expired, you're going to have to check and see for what period of time has there been a pause with respect to the limitation period in your province. And I'd like you to think of it as somebody just putting a finger on the clock and basically the clock's not advancing. What I'd like to do, and this is where people get really confused, what are the consequences of the expiry of a limitation period? Now, the debt does not magically go poof, okay? The debt still exists. But what is really important is that once the limitation period expires, you acquire an important defense that's like a shield. It's like it's a superhero's shield. And if your creditor were to sue you after the expiry of a limitation period, all you would have to do is file a defense and plead the expiry of your province's limitation period as a full and complete defense, and you'll be successful, like every time. Now, this is where people get messed up, is they think that once the limitation period has expired, they can go to sleep. And that's the worst thing that you can do, because some creditors will sue you after the expiry of a limitation period. And if you do not file a timely defense and plead the expiry of your province's limitation period as a full and complete defense, your creditor will get a default judgment against you. And you should kick yourself because you weren't paying attention during this video. When should an unpaid account drop off my credit report? And I'm going to have to divide this into two parts. One part, I'm going to talk to Ontarians, and the other part, I'm going to speak to everybody, every Canadian, except people living in Ontario. So let's deal with everybody who lives in Canada except the people in Ontario. We'll deal with the Ontario people later. If you live in Canada but not in Ontario, then your unpaid account is supposed to fall off your credit report 6 years after the date of your last payment. Now, there are some unethical debt buyers and some unethical collection agencies out there who will play all sorts of games so that that does not come off your credit report when it's supposed to, and that's illegal. And I've helped a lot of people deal with that issue. Now, the second category we're going to deal with is all those people in Ontario, because the law in Ontario is a little bit different. In Ontario, an unpaid account does not have to fall off your credit report until 7 years have expired from the date of your last payment. Now, in Canada, we have two credit reporting agencies, and you may be aware of them. We've got Equifax Canada and we've got TransUnion. Now, one of those credit reporting agencies go with 6 years and the other one will do with 7 years. And if you look in the description to this YouTube video, I'll provide further details. At what point should creditors and their collection agents stop calling me? Now, the answer to this is never. If you have an unpaid account, then it's perfectly legal for your creditor and your creditor's authorized collection agent to call you up and demand payment of your account for the rest of your natural life. Now, if 6 years have gone by, you can say to them, Mr. Collector, did you know that this doesn't show up on my credit report? And did you know that if you were to sue me, I would file a defense and I would win? Or you may just want to say, Mr. Collector, go jump in the lake. Or you may want to say something a little rougher, because I know those collectors can be rough sometimes. So if you're having that kind of day, you may want to say something a little rougher than go jump in the lake to that collector when they're calling about an account where the date of your last payment is more than six and a half years ago. So I hope that what I've been able, there's one exception. In Alberta, if you live in Alberta and 6 years have gone by from the date of your last payment on an account, then it is illegal for your creditor or their collection agent to call you unless they've sued you and got a judgment against you. Now, I hope that that's added some clarity to these three questions, and some of you may want to call me because you may want clarification of that. But I hope that this video has provided you with at least a little better understanding in terms of what is the impact of the passage of time on your unpaid account. Thanks.